Charleston, 1849. The sun was lowering behind the courthouse steeple when the final auction bell rang. The square had nearly emptied. The air smelled of sweat, salt, and rain-soaked timber. Among the few remaining bidders stood Elias Brant, a plantation owner from the outskirts of Savannah, known for his precision, not his mercy. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he gestured toward the last figure on the block, a woman veiled in a gray cloth, hands bound, barefoot on the damp planks. "She's the last of the shipment," he muttered. "Unsold since dawn." The crowd stayed silent. No bids. Even the drunk traders looked away. 20 cents, Elias called, almost out of boredom. The hammer fell before the echo of his voice faded. As he approached, the woman's head tilted slightly, as though she'd been waiting for him. Beneath the veil, her eyes were open but distant, unfocused, as if they were seeing something far behind him. When he signed the ledger, the auctioneer leaned close and whispered, "You should have left her here." The carriage wheels groaned over red clay and swamp rot. Elias studied his new purchase through the small glass pane. She hadn't spoken once. Her wrists bore old marks, not from rope but from something thinner, sharper. Her name, according to the auction slip, was Mara. Age unknown. Origin unrecorded. He'd bought many before, but something about her silence pressed against him like humidity. Near midnight, they crossed into Brant County. The driver spat over the side and muttered a prayer. "Ain't right bringing her through this way," he said. "Why not?" Elias asked. The man didn't answer. When they reached the main gate of Brant Hall, the horses began to rear. One snapped its harness and bolted into the trees. Elias struck the remaining horse to keep it steady. Mara never flinched. As the iron gates opened, the old house loomed, its windows flickering with lamplight, though no one waited inside. Elias felt it then. Not fear, but the faint recognition of something that had been waiting long before he arrived. The servants refused to take Mara's belongings, though she carried none. Elias ordered them to place her in the east wing, the part of the house sealed since his wife's death 3 winters ago. He unlocked the door himself. Dust, wilted curtains, and the faint scent of lavender. "Sleep here until morning," he said. Mara stepped across the threshold and turned slowly toward the mirror on the wall. For the first time she spoke. "Do not cover the glass," she said. Her voice was flat, practiced, like someone repeating an order from long ago. Elias left without reply, though he noticed the faint reflection in the mirror shimmered differently than her body's movement. That night, the servants whispered downstairs that they'd seen her shadow move through the hall, though her door had never opened. The house, they said, breathed again. In his study, Elias opened the Plantation ledger, tracing the line of each name, each purchase, each death. He'd done it for years, marking lives as numbers, never memories. But one name stopped him cold. Mara, listed under 1821, 30 years ago. Beside it, in faded ink, a note read, "Returned, unfit for labor." Fused burial, Elias blinked, uncertain. The handwriting wasn't his father's, nor his grandfather's. The column for origin read, "None known." Arrived alone. He closed the book and poured a glass of brandy. But the echo of that phrase, refused burial, clung to him. From upstairs, faintly, came a sound, a woman humming a melody he didn't recognize. Old, slow, like a mourning song. When he looked again at the ledger, the ink beside her name appeared darker than before, as though freshly written. At dawn, the housekeeper found Elias standing outside Mara's room. The door was open. Inside, the mirror had cracked through its center, though no sign of struggle. The window overlooked the fields, still heavy with fog. Mara was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands folded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You should send me back," she said quietly. Elias frowned. "Back where?" She looked at him then. and he realized her eyes were the same color as the clay that buried his family plot. That afternoon, the overseer reported that the soil in the northern field had turned black overnight. No rain, no footprints, just a spreading stain, shaped like a woman lying down. And for the first time in years, Elias heard the bell from the old chapel ring, though its rope had long since rotted away. By noon, 2 house servants asked permission to leave. They would not say why, only that the air felt wrong. Elias dismissed them, irritated. Superstition was for the poor and the simple, not for men who kept ledgers and land. But when he passed the kitchen later, he saw the cook standing frozen at the doorway, her hand trembling. "Sir," she whispered, "that woman, she don't eat." Elias frowned. "She must." "No, sir. We left her food twice. Both times it spoiled 'fore the sun was down." He went to see for himself. In Mara's room, the tray of bread and broth had blackened with mold, though it had been set there only an hour before. She was by the window again, staring into the field. "The ground remembers," she said without turning. "Even when men pretend it doesn't." Elias stepped back. There was no accusation in her voice, but the words felt older than she was. A week later, a courier arrived from Charleston with a folded paper addressed to Elias. It was from the auction clerk. It read simply, "Mr. Brant, remove the woman at once." The other buyers knew her case. Her name was erased from the record by order of the magistrate. "She is not to be sold again." Beneath that, an attached note in another hand. In 1821, she was examined by the physician at King's Parish. No pulse, no breath, yet she would not decay. Elias set the letter down. His fingers were trembling before he realized it. He went upstairs, but her room was empty. The cracked mirror remained, and in its reflection, for a moment he saw himself 30 years older. The fields outside burned bare. The northern field continued to darken. Nothing grew there now, not even weeds. The overseers said the soil turned oily underfoot. One claimed he saw shapes moving beneath it, not worms, but something breathing slow. Elias ordered the men to dig. 2 hours later, one of them collapsed after unearthing a row of small bones. Human, dozens. They'd been laid neatly, shoulder to shoulder, in lines that stretched beyond the ridge. When Elias examined one skull, he noticed something strange. A thin metal pin through the jawbone, as though wired shut long ago. He asked the overseer if they'd ever buried anyone in that field. "Not us, sir," the man said. "Maybe before your people came." That night Mara returned, her dress smeared with soil. "You opened it," she said, her tone neither angry nor afraid. "You shouldn't have opened it." In the plantation's attic, beneath stacks of moth-eaten ledgers, Elias discovered a leather-bound book, Journal of Father Jonathan Kane, 1821. Its entries described an epidemic, not of sickness, but of silence. Those brought from the northern ship began to speak the same words in their sleep. The priest had written, "A prayer without a god, a rhythm that made the ground tremble. We burned their belongings, but the soil kept breathing." Later entries became frantic. The woman called Mara was found still and cold. "We sealed her beneath the chapel with the others. May she rest until the Lord forgets this place." Elias closed the journal, his breath shallow. The chapel's bell, the one that had rung without a rope, stood just beyond the northern field. Elias rode out to the chapel at dusk. The building leaned with age, its steeple half collapsed. Ivy crawled across the door like veins. He dismounted and pushed the warped wood open. The air inside was thick, neither cold nor warm, but dense, as if the space itself resisted him. The altar was gone, replaced by a slab of stone engraved with unfamiliar symbols. Beneath it the floor sagged, the outline of something buried below. He heard it then, the faint hum, low and constant, like air moving through a throat that had no lungs. Behind him, a whisper, You were never the first to own me. He turned. Mara stood at the entrance, her veil gone. Her skin seemed almost translucent in the dim light, but her eyes were steady, ancient. Their sin built your name, she said, and now the land will take it back. The hum deepened, rising through the floorboards like breath through a wound. The sound in the chapel didn't stop when Elias fled. It followed him back across the fields, a low, steady rhythm like a heartbeat beneath the soil. By midnight, the sound had spread through the house. The servants huddled together in the kitchen, whispering prayers that made no sense. In his study, Elias found the walls vibrating softly, the ink in his ledgers trembling. He pressed his ear to the floorboards. Faintly, beneath the wood, he heard voices. Not wailing, not human, but singing. A hymn without melody, only rhythm echoing the sound from the chapel. When he shouted for silence, the song stopped. But the stillness that followed felt worse, like the pause before a scream. Outside, he saw Mara standing barefoot in the yard, her face turned toward the black field. Her hands were clasped as though in prayer. The soil around her feet moved, breathing shallowly with her. The next morning, Elias tore through the portrait gallery, searching for answers in the painted faces of his ancestors. Each frame bore the same posture, proud men, cold women, until he reached the oldest canvas, dated 1822. The subject was a man who looked unmistakably like him, though the nameplate beneath read Thomas Brant, 1822. Beside him in the painting stood a veiled woman. The painter had rendered her face in faint, unfinished brushstrokes, but beneath the paint, Elias could see that the image had been altered, layers scraped and redone. He leaned closer. Underneath the paint, faintly, another name had been scratched into the wood. Mara. Suddenly, the oil on the canvas began to darken, bleeding outward like fresh ink. Elias stumbled back as the woman's eyes seemed to open, her gaze locking with his, and for one heartbeat, the portrait whispered, "Still yours." The overseer came to Elias the next day, pale and shaking. He claimed the field was moving again. "What do you mean, moving?" Elias demanded. "Like it's breathing, sir. Like something's alive underneath." He handed Elias a piece of wood, part of a coffin lid unearthed by the plow. Etched into it were strange markings, circles and lines forming a pattern that pulsed faintly when held near light. The overseer confessed more. "My granddaddy told me your kin buried people out there before the war. Not for labor, but for silence. So they were taken from a ship that came in without record." Elias felt his stomach twist. He thought of the ledger's note, refused burial. That night the overseer disappeared. The next morning, his boots were found upright in the black field, filled to the brim with that same dark soil, still warm to the touch. The chapel bell rang again at dawn. This time, everyone heard it. The sound was deep, almost metallic, echoing across the plantation grounds like a funeral toll. The servants fled. Some swore the sound wasn't coming from the steeple, but from beneath the ground. Elias went out alone. The air was thick and gray, though no clouds moved above. As he approached the chapel, the bell fell silent, replaced by the distant sound of chains, not dragged but lifted. Inside, Mara stood by the stone slab, her hands pressed to its surface. The symbols glowed faintly beneath her palms. "You keep them still," she said softly. "You've built your house on their silence." Elias stepped forward. "What are you?" Her eyes met his. "What's left when men stop burying their guilt?" By nightfall, Elias could no longer bear the silence of the house. The walls seemed to hum. The mirrors sweated. Every breath he took tasted like iron. He returned to the chapel with a lantern and a shovel. The slab lifted easier than it should have, as if the earth had been waiting for this. Beneath it, a staircase spiraled down into the dark, carved from wet stone. He descended, the air thick with rot and salt. At the bottom, a corridor stretched into shadow. The walls were covered with names carved by hand, the names of those he had owned and those his father had sold. At the end of the corridor stood a single wooden coffin. Its lid was open. Inside lay nothing but a dress, gray, veiled, waiting. As he touched it, the air shifted behind him. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. "Mara," he whispered. Her voice came from everywhere at once. "You remember me now." Elias stood before the open coffin. The dress inside shifted as though caught in a slow current. The air around him thickened, carrying whispers that weren't quite words. The walls of the corridor pulsed faintly, breathing with the rhythm of the soil above. He lifted his lantern. The flame bent sideways, drawn toward the carvings. One name glowed brighter than the rest: Mara Brant. For a moment he thought his own surname was a trick of the light, but beneath it another line had been etched by a smaller, deliberate hand. "The debt is still owed." When he turned, the stairway was gone. Only the humming earth remained, circling him like a pulse. Then a woman's voice whispered near his ear, "Your blood wrote the deed. Your bones will sign it." He woke on the chapel floor at dawn. The lantern burned to ash beside him. His boots were coated in black dust that wasn't soil. Outside, the plantation had changed. The fields shimmered like water, rippling though no wind stirred. The great house leaned, its windows dark. Elias rode toward the gate, but found the road looped back upon itself. Each turn brought him again to the chapel door. Time had folded. The land had sealed him in. On the third pass, Mara stood in the road. "You keep searching for escape," she said. "But the gate was never built for the guilty." He shouted that he'd done nothing. She only looked at him with something close to pity. "You carry their names in your blood. The earth remembers every syllable." That evening, the mirrors in Brant Hall began to hum, their surfaces clouded with gray light until his reflection vanished. When he called for Mara, her voice came from inside the glass. "The house is remembering," she said. "Each room is a confession." As she spoke, the walls around him blurred into images. His ancestors signing deeds, branding slaves, building the chapel over unmarked graves. Their faces never turned toward the camera of his mind, but he felt their eyes just beyond the reflection, watching him inherit their silence. The largest mirror in the foyer cracked down its center. From the fracture poured a thin stream of black water that hissed where it touched the floorboards. The house moaned, a long-drawn breath that shook the chandeliers. By midnight, rain fell without clouds. It came from the soil itself, rising in thin sheets until the yard became a mirror. The chapel doors burst open under unseen pressure, and the black water within carried bones, letters, fragments of rosaries, all drifting toward the house. Elias waded through it, shouting Mara's name. Each time he spoke, the water rose higher until it reached his chest. Then she appeared on the surface, walking over it as though it were glass. "The land is only returning what you buried," she said. "You can drown or atone," he demanded to know how. "By remembering," she whispered. "All of it." The water turned clear for an instant, and beneath it he saw hundreds of faces staring upward, their mouths open in silent song. As dawn approached, the flood receded, leaving the plantation silent. Elias found himself standing where the chapel once stood. Only the stone slab remained, glowing faintly from within. He placed his hand on it, and images surged through him. A ship arriving without record, priests whispering curses, men sealing a woman alive beneath a church floor to hide their sin. When the vision faded, the stone cracked and light poured out, not bright but warm, like morning sun through fog. Mara stepped from it, no longer veiled. Her expression was calm, almost merciful. "The debt is paid," she said. "The house will rest when you do." Elias fell to his knees, the soil beneath him soft as breath. As the light consumed the field, the name Brant Hall faded from its gate, leaving only ivy and wind. And then there was silence, the first true silence the land had known in 100 years. By 1903, the plantation was gone. Travelers through Brant County spoke of a clearing where no birds nested, no trees rooted. The soil there was pale, smooth as ash, and sound vanished inside it. Footsteps dulled, voices dimmed. Local folklore called it the Field of Silence. Children were warned never to cross its center after dusk, when the air grew still and the horizon seemed to bend. A surveyor from Savannah wrote in his log that his compass failed near the site. "The needle turns inward," he noted, "as though the earth itself remembers its heart." At the county courthouse, the Brant name had been erased from all property records. Only one ledger remained, water-stained and incomplete. Its final entry read, "Debt settled. Boundaries returned to the soil." In 1932, a historian named Margaret Hale arrived to catalog forgotten estates of the South. She'd heard whispers of Brant Hall, a plantation that dissolved after a storm no one recalled. Locals avoided her questions, but one elderly man finally spoke. "That land don't keep shape," he said. "Maps can't hold it. You'll find it once, maybe twice. Then it moves." Margaret laughed politely, yet her journal later recorded strange phenomena. Photographs that refused to develop, ink that turned gray overnight. In one blurred plate, however, a faint outline appeared. The remains of a chapel. Its doorway illuminated by something brighter than the sun but softer than fire. She wrote, "There's a rhythm beneath this soil, steady as breath. If I listen too long, I forget to breathe myself." Margaret followed the rhythm to a small ridge where fragments of iron protruded from the ground. Curved, resonant. When struck, they rang clear as a bell, though no tower stood nearby. She recorded the sound on wax cylinder. Playback revealed more than tone. Behind the chime, a woman's voice whispered in cadence with the echo. It said only one word, "Remember." The historian brought the recording to a local university. Technicians dismissed it as interference. Yet when amplified, multiple voices emerged, layered and harmonic like a choir rising from water. That night, the phonograph needle continued spinning after the cylinder ended. The empty groove still sang. A year later, the state began resurveying Brant County for rail expansion. Margaret joined the team. Every attempt to map the old plantation failed. Instruments drifted. Measurements reversed. Then, on the final night of the survey, lightning revealed an outline across the field. Faint walls, doorways, corridors of light hovering inches above the ground, as if the house remembered its shape. Within that phantom architecture, a single figure appeared, veiled, gray, motionless. Margaret raised her lantern. The figure lifted its head. For a heartbeat, the air trembled with a low hum, the same rhythm the recording had captured. Then the vision collapsed, leaving only rain and soil. The following morning, the rail project was abandoned. The field was declared unstable ground. Margaret's journals were archived but quietly sealed under state order. Her final entry reads, "Brant Hall was never destroyed. It was forgiven. The land keeps its own scripture, written in silence, read by the wind. The woman they buried beneath the chapel was never vengeance, only memory refusing to vanish. Today, the site remains empty. Travelers say that on certain mornings when mist rolls low, a bell rings once from nowhere. The sound lasts exactly as long as a single breath, and then the world grows quiet again, as if history itself exhales." Savannah, 1957. Archivist Edwin Corbin inherited a box of forgotten materials from the estate of Margaret Hale, the historian who vanished during the 1934 rail survey. Inside was a cracked wax cylinder labeled Brant Field. Voice test. When Edwin played it, the first 30 seconds were silence, followed by a low hum, rhythmic, like distant machinery. Then a woman's voice whispered through static, "Remember." He assumed it was damage until he realized the hum matched no electrical frequency known to engineers. Sound technicians who examined the cylinder said it had been recorded in total absence of ambient noise, an impossibility in open air. Edwin began to dream of a vast, empty field. In the dream, he always heard a bell, then woke to find dust on his hands, though he lived miles from soil. While cataloging Margaret's personal effects, Edwin found a photograph tucked behind a library ledger. It showed a group of surveyors standing before an open plain, but one corner of the image shimmered, as if the emulsion had never set. Under magnification, a faint silhouette appeared in that blurred space, a veiled figure standing several paces behind the men. No one in the team's roster matched her description. Edwin filed the photograph for restoration. The technician later reported that the image resisted chemical fixing. It refogged every time it was dried, as if rewriting itself. Weeks later, the technician resigned without explanation, leaving only a note on Edwin's desk. The woman is not in the picture. The picture is inside her. In 1963, a regional radio station aired a short segment about unsolved mysteries of the South. Edwin offered the Brant Hall legend, playing a copy of Margaret's recording live on air. Listeners flooded the station with calls reporting the same phenomenon. During the playback, their radios emitted a second voice overlapping the broadcast, whispering fragments of names, locations, and dates no one recognized. When the engineers replayed the tape afterward, the whisper was gone, yet the studio clock had lost exactly 7 minutes during transmission. A transcript of that broadcast survives today. In the margin, Edwin's handwriting adds, "The hum follows power lines now." In 1971, a state cultural historian interviewed Edwin for an oral history project. He was an old man by then, hands trembling, yet his voice remained precise. "They built that house over a mouth," he said. Not a metaphorical one. The earth there had a pulse. They sealed it with names and blood. When the seal broke, time folded in on itself. The interviewer asked if he believed the woman in the story was real. "She was never a ghost," Edwin said. "She was memory. And memory doesn't die. It rearranges the present until it's seen again." The recording ended abruptly when the reel ran out. When technicians reviewed the tape, they found an extra minute of faint sound, a bell tolling once, followed by quiet breathing. After Edwin's death in 1974, his belongings were sent to the state archives. Among them was a small notebook labeled Field Report. Personal inside were coordinates marking an unlisted region of Brant County, the same site of the original plantation. The final page contained a single passage written in uneven ink. "I saw the field again tonight. Flat, white, silent. The soil opened and released light instead of dust. A woman stood at its center, unbound, unburdened. She looked at me and said, 'The silence keeps us whole.' Then the field closed and the stars returned." The notebook ends there. No one who visited the coordinates afterward found anything. Only wind, wild grass, and a faint ring of rusted iron buried in the earth, shaped like the rim of a forgotten bell. Atlanta. 282. Archivist Janine Coulter was combing through mislabeled state film stock when she noticed one canister stamped only with a crude 7. Inside lay decayed nitrate film, dated 1933, 1 year before Margaret Hale's disappearance. She transferred a few frames under a safe light. They showed the familiar field, pale and skeletal. The final inches of film bore a pattern that wasn't chemical rot. It resembled handwriting etched directly into the emulsion. "Do not wake the field." During telecine transfer, the machine stalled at frame 237. Every bulb in the restoration lab flickered off for exactly 12 seconds. When light returned, frame 237 was blank, yet the optical soundtrack emitted a low rhythmic pulse identical to Edwin Corbin's hum. In 1986, a small public television station awarded Janine a grant to produce Echoes of Brant Hall, a half-hour historical documentary. Her pitch framed it as an inquiry into Southern folklore, safe, academic, marketable. The night she screened rough footage, 2 sound editors left mid-session. They claimed the reel hissed their own names backward. The station's transmitter later malfunctioned, looping the same 6 seconds of audio for 90 minutes after broadcast. The soft peal of a distant bell. Critics praised the film's atmosphere, unaware that the bell was not part of Janine's design. She never corrected them. During promotion, Janine recorded an interview with a retired surveyor who claimed his father had helped demolish Brant Hall in the 1890s. He described a pit under the dining room, lined with salt and bone dust. When the episode aired, that segment was missing. The broadcast master contained an unexplained gap. Exactly 4 minutes 26 seconds of black leader. The station swore it had not been cut. Janine replayed her personal VHS copy. The gap was there too, yet a faint echo of the surveyor's final words could still be heard if the volume was raised. She was the last, but not the first. In 1993, historian Dr. Leon Preston published Haunting as Archive, the Brant Field Anomaly in a folklore journal. He argued that the Brant phenomenon wasn't haunting but data recursion, cultural memory forcing itself into any medium that tried to erase it. Preston theorized the Woman of Brant Hall was a collective embodiment of the region's suppressed histories, and that every attempt to document her reopened the same temporal wound. Months later, Preston's university office was found sealed shut from the inside, the floor covered in fine white dust. His notes ended mid-sentence. When remembrance exceeds the living become its instrument. The line trailed off into a single ink blot. By 1999, Janine's original reels were stored in a climate-controlled vault. A night guard reported hearing voices when the vault lights dimmed, soft chanting in alternating male and female tones. Security cameras captured nothing. A week later, the refrigeration system failed. Every reel except echoes of Brant Hall melted into chemical slush. That single film remained perfectly intact, its label newly embossed with letters no archivist recognized. Under infrared, the emulsion revealed an additional frame never shot by Janine. A moonlit field, freshly disturbed soil, and in the center, the veiled woman, now facing the camera. The studio froze all access. To this day, Reel 7 and echoes of Brant Hall remain locked in cold storage under state restriction. In 2003, a university film restoration program received permission to digitize echoes of Brant Hall under controlled conditions. The project lead, Dr. Nora Atwell, insisted on isolating the footage from any online network, citing past electromagnetic interference. The first scan began at 11:57 p.m. Inside the lab, all devices operated normally, until the frame containing the veiled figure appeared. The scanner froze, yet the digital counter continued advancing, recording non-existent frames. When playback was reviewed, the footage had expanded by exactly 4 minutes and 26 seconds, the same duration of the 1986 missing broadcast. Those extra frames displayed no image, only oscillating bands of light and a faint pulsation in the soundtrack that formed coherent rhythm when slowed. It matched a human heartbeat. Nora noted that the heartbeat accelerated when observers spoke aloud in the lab. On the 7th playback, the waveform produced what appeared to be whispered syllables. Linguistic experts identified fragments in obsolete Gullah, Latin, and English, all repeating one phrase: "Remember the field." That night, the fire alarms triggered without smoke. Power logs showed the temperature inside the lab had dropped 12 degrees in under a minute. After that incident, Dr. Atwell confined all data to analog drives. She began interviewing former residents of Brant County, searching for descendants connected to the estate. Most refused to speak. One elderly man, Thomas Givens, finally agreed. He claimed his grandfather had been a gravedigger on the property when the plantation was dismantled. Thomas described uncovering a sealed cavity beneath the foundations, lined with iron rings, filled not with bones but shards of mirror and cloth. It weren't a tomb, he told Nora. It was a promise made physical. They said she'd stay quiet if we never looked. Within a week, Thomas suffered a stroke during sleep. Nora, reviewing her audio tape of the interview, heard something that hadn't been present before. A slow knocking sound every 8 seconds, continuing for the full hour. The recording equipment was mechanical, incapable of spontaneous audio overlay. She replayed it through headphones. At the 30-second mark, a woman's breath entered beneath Thomas's words, whispering, "I am looking now." Nora stopped sleeping after that. Her students later found her notes arranged in a perfect circle around the lab's speaker system. Every page scrawled with 2 alternating words, "See me." In 2005, the university suspended Nora's funding. She continued privately, tracing the old coordinates from Edwin Corbin's notebook. With 2 graduate assistants, she drove to Brant County. The land was now overgrown, reclassified as conservation area. Locals warned them that compasses malfunctioned there. They set camp near a shallow depression, exactly matching Corbin's map. Soil samples registered unusually high magnetite content, but no known reason for its symmetrical distribution. At 2:13 a.m., their seismograph detected movement beneath the surface. A rhythmic expansion and contraction, 9 beats per minute like respiration. Nora began filming, narrating calmly despite rising static across the audio track. The footage later recovered shows her approaching the depression's center. She kneels, touches the soil, and whispers, "It's warm." The ground then releases a brief gust of air, bending the nearby grass outward in a perfect circle. The camera tilts, capturing faint phosphorescence spreading through the soil like veins of light. Nora's voice, barely audible, says, "It remembers itself." At dawn, the assistants found her standing motionless at the field's center. Eyes open but unresponsive. Only fragments of that night's video survived. Analysts who examined the digital copy reported frame-level inconsistencies, time codes looping backward for seconds at a time. In one clear sequence, Nora faces the lens and speaks a sentence unheard on sight. History doesn't stay buried. It rewrites the witness. Her expression never moves, yet the lips in the image form additional words, unsynchronized with her own, like another consciousness borrowing her face. Spectral analysis of the audio revealed a secondary waveform embedded beneath her voice, peaking at the exact moments she blinked. When isolated, that waveform translated into intelligible speech. She is awake again. After the field expedition, the university confiscated all material, classifying it as cultural hazard documentation, restricted access. The assistants withdrew from academia. One joined a monastery. The other vanished en route to Colorado, leaving behind a camera bag containing only magnetic dust. The footage resurfaced online briefly in 2008, before being taken down under DMCA claim by an unknown party. In 2010, a final attempt to restore echoes of Brant Hall was undertaken by the National Archive. During the restoration, technicians noticed the film stock itself was changing density as it ran, like breathing. When the reel ended, the machine displayed an unaccounted final frame. The empty field under moonlight. No figure visible. Yet anyone present during playback reported hearing a single bell toll, clear as glass. Power meters spiked, and for precisely 7 minutes, the time once lost in the 1963 broadcast, the entire building's surveillance network went blank. When systems returned, the film had cooled to ambient temperature, and the last frame bore a new inscription burned into its edge: "Remembrance complete." No further anomalies were recorded. The field site was later flooded during a levee project, vanishing beneath water and reeds. But locals say that some nights when the humidity is high, a low hum travels across the surface, steady, human. Patient. Archivists now refer to the Brant Field phenomenon as a recursion of witness, a haunting not of spirits, but of history itself demanding recognition. The legend closes where it began, an act of purchase, an act of silence, and the endless pulse of the forgotten calling through every medium that dares to remember.